This Sunday, we're starting a new sermon series based on Walter Brueggemann, who is an Old Testament scholar, based off his book called Sabbath as Resistance, saying no to the culture of now. I think summer is an excellent time to actually practice Sabbath rest because it beckons us to a new rhythm in our lives. Now, during the rest of the year, we struggle to manage the competing priorities, the family demands, the unrelenting pressure of work or retirement. Because the reality is we are people who are overflowing with worry. Not just what will we have for dinner tonight or what should I wear to church, but will the kids be healthy? Will I find someone who accepts me for who I am? What will people think of me? Will my stock portfolio bounce back? Will we go to war? So on and so on and so on. But I think summer gives us a bit of a break from our anxious cycles in our lives. As we take vacations, as we slow down, and when we remember what's most important in our lives. Those moments where we realize that our relationship to God, our relationship to our family and friends are what really are most important. I think that's why they call it the lazy days of summer for a reason. Because summer is this time of renewal to remember even why we enjoy the work we do 6 days out of the week. Now, if we're not mindful, our summer can just become an extension of our already anxious lives. We can begin to feel like there's not enough time to take a break from our work and truly rest. It feels so hard to take a break from our work because we're worried that it's just going to pile up. And it's going to be even more overwhelming when we get back to it before we left it. So we think if I can just keep ahead and work as I go, then it won't be so bad when I get back. Trust me, I get that 100%. How many of you have ended up working on your vacation? I get it. I've done it. I have checked emails, responded to phone calls that are all non-emergency on my days off and on my vacation. Because I too think, well, if I just stay on top of it, it won't be so overwhelming. But who does that impact? Everyone. It hurts my spouse that I'm not fully present to when I'm in the midst of doing that. I'm not fully resting for myself when I'm caught up in this anxious cycle of needing to work to get ahead. Also, I think I've realized that I'm not being a good leader and setting a good example when I break my own boundaries so that I can let the anxious cycles take over and dictate to me what is most important. Telling me that rest is really not needed, that it won't really help at the end of the day. And so I think that's why Barbara Brown Taylor in her book, An Altar in the World, explains Sabbath is God's true gift to those who wish to rest and be free and who are willing to guard those same gifts for every living thing in their vicinity as well. Because when we choose not to rest, we impact everyone around us as well. She goes on to explain, remember the commandment. It's not just for you. It's for your children, your employees, your coworkers, your volunteer helpers, your hunting dogs, your plow horses, your fields, and your migrant workers. It does not matter in the least if they believe in your God. You do, so they get the day off as well. When we rest, we are inviting others to rest as well. Now, I think when we get to vacations, we struggle with resting. Nathan will testify it takes me 3 days to come down after vacation. Anybody else have that problem? Because I think on some level, we're so unaccustomed to resting in our lives because we don't take Sabbath rest during the rest of our year. We're so used to going all the time that slowing down is really hard for us. It feels vulnerable. We feel out of our comfort zone. And we get even more anxious, I think, when we try to rest because we start to worry about all the things that we're dropping because we're resting. We think, well, maybe someone will think we're weak because we need to rest. That something's wrong with us because we can't keep this fast pace up anymore in our lives. And the truth is, I think we're worried that if we rest and slow down, everyone is going to pass us by and we'll be left behind. But that's the lies that anxiety plays with us in our lives. So when we think that our self-worth and our value depend upon constantly working, producing, and creating, of course we're not going to be able to rest because we don't want to be caught behind. So we end up thinking that our security in this life and our well-being is left up to ourselves. And that means that there's no help. And so thus we are solely responsible for ourselves. Yet the truth of our story is that our self-worth and value come from God. Our value does not come from what we do, what we produce, or what we create. We produce and we create, and that has value because that is who we are. We are people of value. It is not the product that we produce that tells us we are worthy and that we are valuable. The truth is we cannot earn our value and self-worth because it has already been given to us. It is a gift. But worry and anxiety erode our trust in God, that God actually has our best interests at heart and is actually providing for what we need. But if we don't rest, we miss the Sabbath gifts that God has for us. Worry and anxiety are not the lifestyle that God intends for us to live. God did not create us to burn ourselves out and burn ourselves into the ground by working relentlessly, always trying to get ahead. God did not intend for us to worry ourselves with fear that we're not doing enough or that we're going to miss out on the life that we should have if we take a break. Instead, God says, here's the gift, one day out of the week, where you can rest and we can celebrate this life together. So our text this morning comes from the book of Exodus, and it tells the story of the Israelites receiving the 10 Commandments. Now, remember with me, prior to receiving the 10 Commandments, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt under Pharaoh's rule. And God has liberated them through the leadership of Moses, liberated them from Pharaoh and Pharaoh's nonstop work of slavery. God has brought them in the wilderness to Mount Sinai so that they can say yes to a regime change in their lives. No more Pharaoh's regime. Now they're saying yes to God's regime in their lives. And so that's going to mean new governance and how they order their lives. And that's where the 10 Commandments come in. And so in verse 1 of Exodus 20, God says to them, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Then we hear the 4th commandment. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Now, this idea of Sabbath to people who were former slaves under Pharaoh is completely foreign to them. They never had a day off in Pharaoh's regime. And all they knew of their worth was producing and creating for Pharaoh. Even Pharaoh didn't know what a day off looked like because Pharaoh had to continue to work day in and day out to make sure he stayed at the top of the pyramid. And he constantly enacted this anxious cycle of production. But now God comes into their lives and says, no more, no more. I'm putting limits on how much you can work in your life. Work and production will no longer be your sole purpose. Instead, God gives them rest, which breaks Pharaoh's cycle of anxiety in their lives. You can start to see how this could be revolutionary for them. Walter Brueggemann explains they are invited to an awareness that life does not consist in frantic production and consumption. For the first time in their lives, they're seen as full human beings because their Creator loves them and knows that they're not used just as a tool to create things and produce things. God will not be in relationship with them for them just to work for God's purpose and so that God can stay on top of the pyramid, because that's not how God ordered creation. They are no longer defined by how many production quotas they meet. Now, from the beginning of creation, the book of Genesis tells us that God created the world in 6 days. So we know that work is good. Even God said so. But then the seventh day happens. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that God had done and rested on the seventh day from all that God had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Again, Walter Brueggemann explains that after God created the world, God rested and did not show up to do more. God did not come in and check, okay, is everything working? I want to just make sure the water's flowing where it's supposed to flow. The animals are doing what the animals are supposed to do. No, God rested. And in this moment, we realize that God has broken this cycle of anxiety. And at the beginning of creation, our world was created anxiety-free because the Creator is anxiety-free and publicly demonstrates that freedom from anxiety by not checking things out. God is not a workaholic. I'm going to say that again. Someone needs to hear it this morning. God is not a workaholic. And if we are created in the image of God, then maybe we too need to remember we are not meant to be workaholics. God is not Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is not God. God does not keep increasing the production schedules. Instead, we see God resting confidently. So when the Israelites say yes to God's relationship at Mount Sinai, they were saying yes to God's schedule for their lives. They were saying no to this constant production and consumption at a frantic pace that was burning them out and literally killing them. Instead, by they saying yes to God's schedule, they recognize that there's a limitation on work, but also a significant placement on rest because it is holy. So this includes that they would have to get their work done in 6 days and truly rest on the seventh. How many of you could imagine getting all your work done in 7 days or 6 days? We can barely get all of our work done in 7 days. But what in our lives, maybe do we need to really center ourselves and think, what would it take for us to get our work down to 6 days? So that when we come to the seventh day, we're not frantically running around, getting errands accomplished, doing chores that were neglected the day before, but where we could truly rest and protect this seventh day. What would you need to say no to? Saying no is so hard. We've been conditioned to say yes and see ourselves as people who are accommodating and who are willing to rise to the occasion. People that they can count on. But I think we're losing ourselves and who God created us to be if we keep sacrificing that day of rest because we're caught up in the anxious cycle of production. So for us to break the patterns of anxiety in our life, we have to first become aware of them. In her book, The Dance of Connection, Harriet Lerner explains that we all have patterned ways of managing our anxieties. Now, there's 2 ways. One, some of us overfunction. Hi, I'm Katie. I'm an overfunctioner. Some of us underfunction. Now, overfunctioning tend to move quickly to advise, rescue, take over, micromanage, and basically get into other people's business rather than looking inward. Anybody else can resonate with that? You don't have to raise your hand. Underfunctioners, on the other hand, get less competent under stress, inviting others to take over, and they often become the focus of worry or concern. I want you just to take a minute and reflect. When you find yourself overfunctioning, right? Overfunctioning tend to quickly move to advise, rescue, take over, micromanage, and basically get into other people's business rather than looking inward. Who and when are you overfunctioning with? And the truth is, I'm sure there's some of us too that can go from overfunctioning to underfunctioning pretty quickly. So if you're underfunctioning, who are you underfunctioning with? And when? Because when we realize that we are hooked in patterns of anxiety, we can more readily recognize that God is calling us to Sabbath rest, where we can practice calm and stillness. When we're in that mode of overfunctioning, like I have to do more, I have to be more, I'm not enough, let me just keep proving myself, let me hustle more for my self-worth, right? I think those, instead of jumping into that and getting stuck on that train ride, maybe it's like, whoa, okay, how do we counter those moments of anxiety? Rest. Where we can be in calm and stillness. Where we can pray confessionally, God, I am hooked right now in anxiety and I'm feeling anxious and I'm not really trusting you right this moment to take care of me. And so I'd rather try to take care of myself than trust that you are going to provide for what I need. But even as I am in fear, O Lord, I still turn to you and trust in you because you are my God and my Creator. Prayer, release. All of this starts to break the cycles of anxiety that we get stuck in. So here's the thing. When we participate in Sabbath, it reminds us who we are and to whom we belong. How many of you want to belong to Pharaoh and Pharaoh's lifestyle and work ethic? I don't think any of us do. We want to belong to God. For God is our God, not Pharaoh or any system that Pharaoh perpetuates even in our own lives. For we are created in the image of God, who did not need to work to get ahead. So nor do we need to constantly work to get ahead. And nor should we expect other people to work relentlessly either, or we become Pharaoh ourselves. Jesus also liberates the disciples from the anxiety system when he tells them, do not worry about your life. Do not worry about your life. What will you eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear? Is life more not than food, and body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your Father in heaven feeds them. I love this question. Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? We know the answer is no. We know that more likely it's taken hours off of our lives. But Jesus is telling the disciples and all who follow him to trust in God's creation and trust that God will see to your well-being. We don't have to work or worry about tomorrow because it's in God's hand. And the truth is, what could be stronger than God's love and God's care? Nothing is stronger than God's love and God's care. And we know through the Easter story that not even death is stronger than God's love and God's care. So that we can look towards tomorrow, knowing that whatever may come our way, God comes too. God is in our tomorrows and in the next days and the days after that. For God does not abandon us or leave us to our own devices. St. Augustine once said, our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Our anxiety and our worries are causing us to be restless, and they drive us further and further away from God. And we think that if we could just work our anxiety out, it'll be done, and then we can put it to rest. But the truth is, the more we keep working and working, that cycle of anxiety and worry just keep going faster and faster and faster, and we cannot breathe. But rest breaks that chain, that hold it has over us. What if, when you feel the rush of worry coming over you, you turned to God in prayer and rested rather than getting swept up in it? Because I think Augustine is saying to us, we are going to continue to be restless until we rest with God. And I think we're so tired that we need to find our rest in God once more. So I want to invite you, how can you practice Sabbath this summer? What do you truly need to do to take a Sabbath day? What might you need to say no to so that you can rest and not feel guilty about it? How might you resting impact your relationships and the time you spend with loved ones? Because here's the thing, God's gift of Sabbath rest is empowering as we say yes to God and no to Pharaoh's system of anxiety. And so may you be empowered this morning to say yes to the rest that God provides for you always. Amen.